Hi, I am Ajit Virkud, Professor of Obstetrics and Gynecology from Mumbai. Hello, today I am going to discuss physiology of menstruation. The word menstruation, coined by the Greeks meaning catharsis, is indicative of the ancient sentiment that menstrual blood is impure. Wharton's views on menstruation are very interesting. He says, nor do we know why, in the reproductive economy, women and monkeys are the sole members of God's creation to be afflicted with this inconvenience. Menstruation is the outward, visible sign of an inward physiological event. In medical literature, there are many interesting definitions of menstruation, such as monthly abortion of the residue of an unfertilized ovum. A woman menstruates because she does not conceive. The womb weeps bloody tears for its loss. Uterus weeps in the memory of the ovum departed 14 days previously. Corner has defined menstruation as nature's physiological flaw. The textbook definition of menstruation is as follows: periodic discharge of blood, mucus, and cellular debris from the endometrium, which occurs at more or less regular, cyclical, and predictable intervals from menarche to menopause, except during periods of pregnancy, lactation, and ovulation or pharmacological intervention. In its true sense, only bleeding after ovulatory cycle, that is discharge of progestation endometrium, should be referred to as menstruation. Bleeding that occurs after an ovulatory cycle or after withdrawal of exogenously administered hormones should be called hormonal withdrawal bleeding. Physiology of menstruation can be discussed as three interdependent events. The most important event that controls the physiological process is the endocrine cycle. The endocrine hormones control the other two events, the ovarian cycle and the endometrial cycle. First, I will discuss the endocrine cycle. The endocrine axis that governs the menstrual cycle is called hypothalamo-pituitary gonadal axis. The release of a mature fertilizable oocyte from the dominant follicle is the culmination of a wonderfully integrated and synchronized succession of hormonal actions and morphological changes involving principally the anterior hypothalamus, anterior pituitary, and ovaries. Under the influence of catecholamines and indolamines secreted by the cerebral cortex, the hypothalamus secretes gonadotropin-releasing hormone GnRH that stimulates the pituitary to produce FSH, follicular stimulating hormone, in the first half of the cycle, and in the second half of the cycle both luteinizing hormone LH and FSH. FSH acts on the ovary, which in turn produces estrogen that has negative feedback action on the pituitary. After ovulation caused by LH surge at mid-cycle, the corpus luteum produces progesterone. This will be discussed in detail in the ovarian cycle. Although the major players in this system are gonadotropin releasing hormone, GnRH, FSH, LH, estrogen and progesterone, essential fine-tuning is provided by a large number of other factors including inhibin, activin, anti-Mullerian hormone and growth factors. The HPGA is also influenced by thyroid hormone and prolactin. The exact mechanism is unknown. The pattern of gonadotropin secretion is critically regulated by both negative and positive feedback from gonadal steroids and is influenced by inhibin and activin also. Several laws govern the behavior of the reproductive hormones. At the beginning of the menstrual cycle, in response to low estrogen levels, the pituitary secretes FSH, which in turn stimulates the ovary to make more estrogen. The rising levels of estrogen in turn suppress pituitary FSH. In a way, the law of negative feedback serves like a thermostat. Drugs used in gynecology that make use of this law of negative feedback are oral contraceptive pills and clomiphene citrate. Most other endocrine systems in the body, like TSH and thyroid hormones, ACTH and cortisol, also make use of the law of negative feedback. When the pituitary senses a high enough level of estrogen for a long period, it responds paradoxically not with suppression of gonadotropin but with gonadotropin surge. This is referred to as the law of positive feedback. Positive feedback mechanism is responsible for the LH surge that triggers ovulation. It is interesting to note that no other endocrine system in the human body makes use of the positive feedback mechanism. Pulsatile GnRH is essential for the secretion of gonadotropins. The frequency of pulses in the follicular phase is about 1 pulse every 90 minutes. At mid-cycle, the frequency is briefly increased. During the luteal phase, the pulses gradually slow down to 1 in every 4 to 6 hours. Lack of pulsatility suppresses rather than stimulates gonadotropin production. Exposure of hypothalamus and pituitary to a threshold of E2 level of greater than 200 picograms per ml for a critical interval, approximately 50 hours, induces LH surge, a transient phenomena that is referred to as estrogen positive feedback, which is critical for ovulation. Ovulation normally occurs about 9 hours after the peak of the LH surge at mid-cycle. LH and FSH continue to decline and they reach their lowest points toward the end of the menstrual cycle. If the declining LH levels of the late luteal phase are not replaced by the equivalent placental hormone SCG, the corpus luteum regresses and dies. Theory of ovarian steroidogenesis, called as the two-cell, two-gonadotropin theory, was first proposed by Falk in 1959. According to this theory, there are two cellular compartments that are driven independently by LH and FSH to produce ovarian steroids. LH stimulates the theca cell segment of the follicle and induces production of androgens from cholesterol, while the FSH is responsible for promoting conversion, that is aromatization of androgen precursors to estrogens in the granulosa cell compartment. It is believed that this model may be oversimplified because granulosa cell aromatase following induction by FSH is probably able to respond directly to LH also. Recently, Barnes et al. In the year 2000 and others have challenged this theory and claimed that in humans, both gonadotropins are required for proper ovarian steroidogenesis. This graph shows the rising and falling levels of pituitary and ovarian hormones during the follicular and luteal phases of the menstrual cycle. Next, I will elaborate the ovarian cycle. The first phase of the ovarian cycle is the follicular phase. In this phase, under the influence of FSH secreted by pituitary gland, a few Graafian follicles start growing in one or both ovaries. In the next few slides, I will discuss the three phases of maturation of Graafian follicle. The granular cells lining the follicle secrete estrogens. The primordial follicle is the most immature stage of the ovarian follicular development. The primordial follicle consists of the oocyte surrounded by a single layer of flat supporting granulosa cells. First stage is the initiation of growth of the primordial follicle that grows to a size of 0.2 mm diameter. It takes about 6 months for the follicle to develop to this stage and is independent of gonadotropin stimulation. The antral cavity develops in the second stage. This is also a slow phase lasting about 70 days, during which the follicle grows in size from 0.5 mm to 2 mm in diameter. It is relatively independent of gonadotropin influence. The final stage of development involves the recruitment of a cohort of antral follicles and the selection of one of them to become the dominant follicle. The follicle grows in size from 2 mm to about 16 mm over a period of 14 days. FSH is absolutely essential for this stage. The rise in FSH during the follicular phase allows recruitment of about 30 follicles. After 7 days, under the influence of FSH and estradiol, one follicle of the cohort starts growing faster than the rest and becomes the dominant pre-ovulative follicle that is destined to rupture. The remainder of the cohort of recruited follicles undergo atresia. Selection of the dominant follicle is a process by which one follicle of the cohort is endowed with the ability to mature earlier and/or quicker than all others. Although the exact mechanism of this is not yet known, it may be that the assignment of the follicle to be selected as the dominant one in the next cycle is brought about by the rescuing action of the mid-cycle FSH peak in the previous cycle. The process is completed by the 7th cycle day. The most critical event in the ovarian cycle is ovulation. Around mid-cycle, that is the 14th day, few hours after the LH surge, the dominant follicle, which has reached the size of 16 to 18 millimeters, ruptures, leading to ovulation. Human ovum dies within 12 to 24 hours if it is not fertilized. The third part of the ovarian cycle is the luteal phase. The collapsed follicle, after rupture, undergoes a metamorphosis into corpus luteum, a yellow body which produces progesterone, estrogen, and inhibin. It reaches its peak by the 5th day and regresses by the 10th day. The total lifespan of corpus luteum is 14 to 15 days. This period is constant irrespective of the length of the menstrual cycle, and this is the reason why menstruation occurs constantly 14 to 15 days after ovulation. Later, the corpus luteum gets fibrous and is called corpus fibrosum, and finally becomes corpus albicans, which is white in color. This is a graphical representation of the ovarian cycle showing the 3 phases. And lastly, the endometrial cycle. Endometrial cycle has the following phases. The menstruation phase lasts for plus or minus 4 days. The next is the regeneration phase that lasts for plus or minus 3 days. Proliferative phase lasts for plus or minus 7 days. The second half of the endometrial cycle is called as the secretory phase. Overall duration of the follicular phase is variable, average being 14 days, but the secretory phase has a fixed duration of 14 days. Menstrual phase is accompanied by necrosis and shedding of the superficial 2/3 of the endometrium. Basal layer of endometrium containing the stumps of the endometrial glands, what are referred to as endometrial seeds, remain intact and are never shed. In the regenerative phase, sheets of endometrial cells arising from the stumps of the glands in the basal endometrium migrate with amazing rapidity across the surface of the endometrial cavity. Within 2 to 3 days, the entire surface is covered. This is called re-epithelialization. From 7th to 14th day, there is estrogen-induced endometrial growth. All components rapidly proliferate and undergo following changes. The short test tube glands elongate until they become tortuous. The cells show prolific mitotic activity. The stromal cells increase in number and size and show numerous mitoses. The spiral arterioles supplying the superficial endometrium become more spiral and convoluted. The endometrium becomes thicker, maximum 3 to 5 millimeters, and more vascular. In the secretory phase, under the influence of progesterone secreted by corpus luteum, the glands and stroma show following distinct changes. Glandular lumen becomes distended. Glands become mature, tortuous with corkscrew appearance. The endometrial surface is thrown into folds. The stroma shows a dramatic conversion of stromal cells into large polygonal decidual cells. 2 layers are formed, the superficial compact layer and the deep spongy layer. In the secretory phase, with the demise of corpus luteum, progesterone levels fall and endometrium undergoes dehydration and regression. Spiral arterioles, unable to shorten and restricted by space, undergo undue compression until blood flow through them stops. The resulting anoxia causes infarction and shedding of the superficial tools of the endometrium, what is referred to as menstrual bleeding. Menstrual blood is predominantly arterial, with only 25% of the blood being venous in origin. It contains tissue debris, that is fragments of endometrial tissue, desquamated vaginal epithelium and mucus. It also contains prostaglandins and relative large amounts of fibrinolysin from endometrial tissue, due to which menstrual blood does not normally contain clots. The average amount of blood loss is about 30 ml, and the range being 5 to 80 ml. When menstrual blood loss is excessive, the flow is too great for the amount of lysine available, resulting in passage of blood clots typical of menorrhagia. Evidence suggests that the menstrual clots are not true clots, as they do not contain fibrin but are red cell aggregations to mucoid substances, mucoproteins and of glycogen. Beller also suggests that the clots are primarily formed in the vagina. In 2007, international agreement was reached on the terminology and definitions to be used to describe what is normal and abnormal menstrual bleeding. This table shows the normal range, that is the 5th to 95th percentile values for various parameters of menstruation. The normal frequency is 24 to 38 days. Cycle to cycle variation of 2 to 20 days over 12 months is considered normal. The normal duration of menstrual flow is 4.5 to 8 days, whereas the normal amount of monthly blood loss should be between 5 to 80 ml. Heavy menstrual bleeding can be subdivided into acute form and chronic form. Abnormal uterine bleeding that has been present in the majority of 6 months or more is called as the chronic type, whereas any episode of heavy menstrual bleeding that, in the opinion of the clinician, is of sufficient severity to require immediate intervention to prevent further blood loss is called acute or emergent form. Here, bleeding is characterized by significant blood loss that results in hypovolemia, that is hypotension, and tachycardia or shock. In the next few slides, I will discuss the various terminologies used in describing hypermenorrhea, that is heavy menstrual bleeding. Bleeding that occurs at normal intervals of 24 to 38 days but with a heavy flow of greater than 80 ml and or duration of greater than 8 days is called as menorrhagia. Uterine bleeding occurring between clearly defined cyclic and predictable menses is called intermenstrual bleeding or metrorrhagia. Excessive, that is greater than 80 ml, and or prolonged menstruation, that is greater than 8 days at regular intervals associated with intermenstrual bleeding is called as menometrorrhagia. Although not described in most other textbooks, I feel there is another type of hypermenorrhea. There are some patients who have such irregular bleeding that they cannot discern which is her heavy menstrual period and which is intermenstrual bleeding, and this I refer to as acyclical bleeding. In other words, there are no clearly defined cyclic and predictable menses. It is an irregular excessive bleeding. Patients with friable exophageal growth on the cervix of carcinoma have acyclic bleeding. Bleeding at less than 24-day intervals is labeled as polymenorrhea. The amount of bleeding at each menses, however, is normal. Bleeding at less than 24-day intervals but with heavy flow of greater than 80 ml and or duration of greater than 8 days is referred to as polymenorrhagia. Bleeding that occurs at intervals of greater than 38 days is called as oligomenorrhea. It is usually caused by a prolonged follicular phase. Bleeding that occurs greater than 1 year after menopause is called as postmenopausal bleeding. For further reading on this topic and other topics, refer to the following books by author.